It was March 2020. The world had just stopped. Airports were shutting down. Schools were closing. People were locking their doors and waiting for something no one fully understood yet. Fear was the only thing spreading faster than the virus itself. And somewhere in Jupiter, Florida, a man realized something. He realized that in the middle of all that chaos, all that confusion, all that terror, nobody would question a story about quarantine. Nobody would look for a woman who had supposedly tested positive for COVID-19 and been taken to a federal facility. Not right away. Not when the hospitals were overwhelmed and the CDC was on every news channel. That was the plan. What David Anthony didn't count on was this. The woman he killed had people who loved her too much to believe the story. People who knew her too well to accept the texts. People who looked at those messages and said, "That doesn't sound like Gretchen." This is the story of Gretchen Anthony, a mother, a teacher, a woman who spent years building a beautiful life in Florida, and who was trying, desperately, to leave the man who would eventually take that life from her. Love true crime? The Ultimate Serial Killer Coloring Book features 65 notorious killers brought to life in bold, black and white line art. Single-sided pages dark, detailed, unforgettable. Available now on Amazon. Gretchen Stoughton Crane was born on January 8, 1969, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She grew up along the Jersey Shore, in West Long Branch, New Jersey, and graduated from Shore Regional High School. She had an eye for creativity. She attended Wood Toby Coburn Fashion School in New York City before earning her bachelor's degree from Monmouth University. She started her career as a teacher. For years, Gretchen worked with children at Wall Township Intermediate School in New Jersey, and later at the Weiss School in Palm Beach Gardens and Wellington Preparatory School in Lake Worth, Florida. Teaching isn't a job you take casually. It takes patience, empathy, and the genuine belief that other people matter. Gretchen had all of that in abundance. At some point, she made the move to Jupiter, Florida, a coastal town in Palm Beach County with warm weather and a pace of life that suited her perfectly. She would live there for roughly 15 years. She paddleboarded. She went to the beach. She loved sunshine and sea life and the community of friends she had built around herself. Eventually, she transitioned from education into human resources, becoming the HR manager at Viking Utility. Her obituary says she loved her colleagues so much she considered them a second family, which tells you something important about who she was. She formed real bonds wherever she went. And at the center of everything was her daughter. Gretchen had been previously married to a man named Jeff Dreyer, and they shared a daughter together. By 2020, that daughter was 12 years old, and Gretchen co-parented with Jeff with the same devotion she brought to everything else. She called her daughter her greatest accomplishment. That was the whole story for her. This is who we're talking about, not just a victim, a whole, full, vibrant person. David Anthony came into Gretchen's life through fitness. He had been her personal trainer before anything romantic developed. On the surface, He made sense to her. He was 6 feet 7 inches tall, athletic, a former college basketball player on scholarship at Eckerd College. When he was at his best, people at the gym liked him. He had a magnetic energy, but David had a past most people didn't know about. He grew up in Palm Beach Gardens, raised by a single mother. As a child, he was overweight, insecure, and bullied. People who knew him described him as withdrawn and afraid of saying the wrong thing. Family members believed he struggled with severe depression from a young age, and some recognized symptoms they associated with bipolar disorder, though no confirmed public diagnosis was ever established. What is confirmed is that David had a criminal history under a former name. Before becoming David Anthony, he went by David Anthony Deutsch. In 1997, he walked into a Blockbuster video store and held it up with a squirt gun. He was also arrested for assaulting a police officer. He plea-dealed both cases, spent a short time in jail, and then reinvented himself. A new name, a new identity as a fitness professional. That talent for presenting one version of himself while hiding another would matter later. Gretchen and David got engaged in late 2014 and married in Las Vegas in 2015. Early on, they appeared to complement each other. She was outgoing and confident. He was quieter and physically disciplined. They shared an active, coastal lifestyle. They kayaked, they fished, they both loved being near the water. Photos from those early years show them smiling, affectionate, a couple who seem to have built something real together. But appearances are lived from the inside, not the outside. And inside that marriage, something was deteriorating. But according to Miami New Times, Gretchen spent the last 3 years of that marriage trying to leave it. She told friends David had become increasingly manic, verbally abusive, unpredictable. They had separated at least once for around 6 months, reconciled, and then things fell apart again. His former boss at Orange Theory, Tabitha Hopkins, said managing him was like playing a constant chess game. She never knew which version of David would show up. She fired him in 2017, gave him another chance, because he said he was working on himself. And by early 2020 was watching him unravel all over again. After a confrontation at the gym that finally crossed a line she couldn't ignore, she fired him for the last time. And then she did something significant. She texted Gretchen directly and warned her to stay away from him. Gretchen texted back that David was crazy. That was the last time Hopkins spoke to her. At home, Gretchen was already living inside that reality. She had installed security cameras in and around the townhouse and monitored him through them. She sometimes locked herself in the bedroom just to create distance between them. She told a close friend she wished David well, but believed he needed to deal with his mental issues and learn to love himself. And in a text to that same friend, she wrote that she planned to put a knife under her pillow, just in case. Sit with that for a moment. A woman who loves the beach, who paddleboards at sunrise, who builds second families out of coworkers, lying in her bed at night, planning where to put a knife. Then came Christmas Eve, 2019. She went through David's backpack and found everything. Her wedding ring, her passport, her driver's license, her credit cards, her cash. All of her essential documents collected in her estranged husband's bag. Whether it was about control, about preventing her from leaving the country, about something else entirely. The discovery terrified her. She acted immediately. She had David move out. She changed the locks. On February 28, 2020, Gretchen Anthony filed for divorce. With the divorce filed and David at his mother's house, Gretchen was rebuilding. She was dating again, carefully. She loved her work. She was fully present in her daughter's life. In the first days of the pandemic, her Facebook looked like everyone else's. Jokes, safety tips, television recommendations. On March 19th, she shared a quote about creating inner peace when chaos surrounds you. David, meanwhile, was unraveling. When Kobe Bryant died in January 2020, David's reaction was extreme. He cried openly during gym classes, wailed in front of clients, and refused to go home when a manager offered to cover for him. His former boss said it was as if he had lost someone personally close to him. It was part of a broader emotional deterioration. He had also become fixated on fleeing to Costa Rica. As COVID-19 began shutting everything down, he told anyone who would listen that the world was ending. He asked friends, former co-workers, even women he had just started dating, if they wanted to leave the country with him. He was operating from a place of escalating paranoia. Then, on March 15, 2020, 1 week before Gretchen's death, David had a violent encounter with Riviera Beach police. Officers saw him allegedly approaching 15-year-old girls while sweating heavily. His license plate had been covered with black electrical tape. When officers tried to arrest him, he allegedly slammed a car door on an officer's arm. He was charged with resisting an officer with violence and released on a $3,000 bond. A large Bowie knife was found under the driver's seat where he had been reaching. 6 days later, Gretchen was dead. 2 days before the murder, he had lunch with a relative. When asked how things were going with Gretchen, his answer was 3 words: not great. Gretchen was last seen at work on Friday, March 20th. Co-workers said she seemed fine, normal, in good spirits, nothing that raised concern. She went home that evening to her Jupiter townhouse, and that was the last time anyone who loved her saw her alive. The following morning, Saturday, March 21st, a neighbor heard screaming coming from the direction of Gretchen's home. Between 6 and 6:30 in the morning, she heard a woman's voice, and the words were unmistakable. No, no, it hurts. Another neighbor, 2 days later, would notice something strange flowing from under Gretchen's closed garage door, a soapy, sudsy substance that had no business being there. A third neighbor had photographed a black Nissan pickup truck parked near the home around the time of the screams. David Anthony owned a black Nissan pickup. Gretchen's security system had cameras positioned both inside and outside the townhouse. David knew about them. He had lived there. What he did not know or failed to think through was that the footage wasn't stored locally on a device he could take. It backed up automatically to the cloud. The recordings investigators later recovered told the story with brutal clarity. They showed David arriving at Gretchen's home in the early morning hours of March 21st. He approached the lanai behind the garage, and he waited, still, patient, hidden. When Gretchen came to the door and opened it, he concealed himself behind it, and then he forced her inside the garage. What followed was captured on audio. Gretchen screamed. She called out for the garage light. She tried to use her Amazon Alexa, first to turn on the light, then to call 911. Alexa, unless it has been specifically configured through compatible emergency services, cannot place calls to 911. Her desperate, terrified attempt to summon help through the smart device that was right there in her home did not bring police in time. The autopsy would later confirm she had defensive wounds. She fought back against a man who stood 6 feet 7 inches tall and had spent years in a gym building physical strength. Gretchen Anthony did not go quietly. She fought for her life. She was killed by stab wounds to the neck and torso. After the killing, David worked to clean and erase what had happened. The garage floor was scrubbed with bleach. Investigators would later find large stains leading toward the driveway. In the master bedroom, there were small blood droplets and a broken picture frame. A towel left on top of the washing machine later tested positive for a blood-like substance. The door between the patio and the garage had been locked, with a key snapped off inside the deadbolt, as though someone had been trying to secure what was inside or had struggled to get out. Then David pulled the security cameras off the walls. He gathered the Amazon devices, the Echo, the Alexa unit, everything that had been recording in that home. He left with what he believed was every piece of evidence that could undo him. He did not know about the cloud. On March 23rd and 24th, 2 days after the murder, the people who loved Gretchen began receiving text messages from her phone. The messages said she had tested positive for COVID-19, that she had gone to Jupiter Medical Center, that she had been transferred to a CDC facility. Then the story escalated. Later messages said she might need to go on a ventilator, might be placed in a medically induced coma, might be held at a CDC center in Belle Glade for an extended period. David also sent an email from Gretchen's work account to her co-workers, claiming she had contracted an acute case of COVID-19 and would not be in. He told a neighbor, when he came by to pick up his dog and asked the neighbor to watch his cat, that Gretchen was in quarantine for 14 days. Think about the timing of this. It was late March 2020. Hospitals were genuinely overwhelmed. Quarantine rules were brand new and confusing. People were terrified of the virus and terrified for the people they knew who had caught it. If there was ever a moment in modern history when a story about someone being taken to a federal quarantine facility might be believed without immediate questioning, this was it. David had chosen his cover story with the precision of someone who understood exactly how fear works. But the people who loved Gretchen knew her, and that was his mistake. Jeff Dreyer, her former husband, the father of her daughter, looked at those texts and felt something was wrong immediately. The grammar was off. The abbreviations were wrong. The tone didn't sound like Gretchen at all. He later told investigators that the writing style reminded him of David, not of her. Another person who knew both of them told police the same thing. Gretchen's boss and close friend, Dawn Paris, grew alarmed when Gretchen didn't check in at work. The email claiming she had COVID did not reassure her. It raised more questions. They called Jupiter Medical Center. The hospital confirmed that Gretchen had not been treated there since 2008, transferring COVID patients to a CDC task force, they added, was not protocol. The CDC center in Belle Glade did not exist. The entire fabrication collapsed within days, and with it, any chance David had of walking away from what he had done. Police searched Gretchen's home and found what was there: bleach stains, blood droplets, the broken deadbolt key, and a garage that had clearly been worked over. Her blue Mini Cooper was found in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center, her purse still sitting inside, but the hospital had no record of her as a patient going back years. Security footage from the parking lot showed the car entering the lot, and a tall figure walking away from it without looking back. David was already far from Florida. He was driving west in his black Nissan pickup truck, his husky Kobe riding with him in the cab. He stopped in Pensacola on March 25th and tried to sell women's jewelry at a local shop. He told the clerk the jewelry had belonged to his mother or stepmother, who had recently died of COVID-19. Store surveillance cameras captured him on video making the transaction. Investigators would later identify pieces of the jewelry as Gretchen's. She was nowhere in the footage. He kept driving, through Alabama, through Louisiana, through Texas, pressing westward. Investigators tracked phone pings from both Gretchen's phone and David's phone as they moved across state lines, coordinating with law enforcement at each step. In Las Cruces, New Mexico, local police caught up with him. They found his truck. They seized his phones and belongings. But at that moment, the evidence wasn't yet airtight. The cloud footage hadn't been fully processed, and without it, they didn't have enough to formally arrest him, so they had to let him go. David walked away from that scene a free man, his dog at his side, with investigators watching and waiting. It was only after the cloud footage from Gretchen's home cameras was fully recovered and reviewed. Footage that showed David's face, showed him hiding behind the door, showed him forcing Gretchen inside, that investigators had everything they needed. On March 31st, 2020, 10 days after the murder, David Anthony was arrested just before midnight, outside a convenience store in Las Cruces, New Mexico. During interrogation, detectives told him they had him on camera. He looked at them and insisted Gretchen was alive. Investigators kept count. He said it 35 times in that interview. 35 times in the face of video evidence, he claimed she was alive. He was extradited to Florida and charged with second-degree murder and kidnapping. For 8 months after his arrest, David refused to say where Gretchen's remains were. Investigators played him a recording of her daughter, 12 years old, pleading with him to tell them where her mother was. He said nothing. In December 2020, he accepted a plea deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree murder and kidnapping, serve 38 years, and reveal where he had hidden Gretchen. Her remains were found 3 miles from her home, wrapped in a blanket in a wooded area behind a Walmart. She had been there since March. The autopsy confirmed stab wounds to the neck and torso, and defensive wounds because she had fought back. On January 14, 2021, David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison. He must serve at least 85% before any chance of early release. His projected release date is 2058. At sentencing, he cried and apologized. He cited untreated mental illness, marijuana use, and his belief that COVID was an Armageddon as contributing factors. Gretchen's sister, Sarah Carey, stood up and called him pure evil, a coward, a monster. She told the courtroom he had stolen a mother from her child. He had nothing to say to that. Forensic analysis. From an investigative standpoint, this case illustrates something critically important. Digital evidence survives human attempts to destroy it. David's plan was layered. He physically removed the security cameras. He took the Amazon devices. He used Gretchen's phone to construct a false narrative. He drove across 6 states to create distance. Every step was deliberate. What he failed to account for was cloud storage. Gretchen's system backed footage remotely. The cameras were gone. The recordings were not. That footage placed him at the scene, showed his face, and captured the moment he forced Gretchen into the garage. It was the single most important piece of evidence in the case. Phone pings formed the second pillar. Investigators tracked both devices in real time across multiple states, coordinating with local law enforcement at each stop. That compressed a cross-country flight into a 10-day capture. The Alexa device deserves special mention. David took it from the home, apparently to suppress the audio, but investigators recovered it from his truck. The recording it contained, Gretchen's voice, her screams, her desperate attempts to call for help, had traveled with him the entire way across the country. He drove his own evidence to New Mexico. The crime scene itself told a clear story even before the cloud footage was recovered. Bleach trails in the garage, blood droplets in the bedroom, a broken key in the deadbolt, and a staged car at the hospital with a purse left inside. Each element pointed toward the same conclusion. The staging of the COVID cover-up, real enough to cause a short delay, not real enough to survive even basic verification, reflects someone who understood the value of time, not someone who had fully thought through the digital footprints he was leaving. Personal opinion. I want to say something directly. Gretchen did everything right. She recognized the danger. She installed cameras. She changed the locks. She filed for divorce. She texted a friend about keeping a knife under her pillow. She was not passive. She was not naive. She was a smart, resourceful woman who saw what was happening and took steps. It wasn't enough. David had a prior criminal record under a different name that the people around him didn't fully know about. His employer had fired him repeatedly for aggression toward women. He had a violent police encounter 1 week before the murder and was back on the street days later. The warning signs were there, across employers, prior relationships, and police records. What I keep thinking about is Gretchen's daughter, 12 years old when her mother was killed, old enough to understand, old enough to make a recorded plea to the man who murdered her. I can't think of a more devastating image in this entire case. Gretchen Anthony was in the middle of reclaiming her life. She had taken the hard steps. She was dating again, loving her work, raising her daughter, posting about inner peace during a pandemic. She was still here, still building. She deserved the rest of her life. If this story moved you, please share it. Not for the views, but because the more people understand how coercive control escalates, the more we can recognize it in the lives of people around us. Subscribe if you're new here. We do this every week because these are not just crime cases. They are lives that mattered. Gretchen Anthony mattered. See you in the next one.